Marcus. Yeah, Marcus was kind of my only boss I've ever I've ever had, really. So yeah, my presentation is really about my journey and how we started as a design project and blended that into a business. So it all starts at OCAD. I was a third-year student looking at trying to figure out a problem that I wanted to solve through our fourth-year project and design a product or solution around that. And I was sitting around having conversation with a group of my friends, these are my friends, and we started talking about the Pap Test. So show of hands, who here knows what a Pap Test is? Okay, so for those of you who don't know what a Pap test is, this is a Pap test. So this is a test that women need to go through to screen for cervical cancer. It feels the way that it looks. It's not a comfortable experience, so we'll go back and start looking at my friends again. and so the conversation was really, we know that this is really important, we know that it's good for our health, but it's just so uncomfortable that I feel like I don't really want to go, and I'm just not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it. And so, there was a funny component to it. Yes, Pap tests are uncomfortable, haha. But then there was sort of another element to it of, why is that the case? Does it have to be really uncomfortable? Why is it that a test that could potentially be life-saving for women, why are women gritting their teeth and just going through it and considering it a necessary evil? What if this was an experience that could be celebrated or could be a lot better than that? So this became the design opportunity that my partner Nancy and Cito and I wanted to explore. On top of that, we started looking at the stats, and we discovered that in Canada, 4 women a day will develop cervical cancer, and 1 woman a day will die. And this is in a developed country where this test is entirely free. And we kind of identified that the problem is that, 1 in 3 women are not screening on a regular basis. And so, of course, these women are going to develop cervical cancer because they're not screening. And on top of that, we found that underscreening was also a big problem for sexually transmitted infections. So we found that there's 116,000 cases of chlamydia and gonorrhea reported in 2012, and that is just the reported cases. 90%, up to 90% of STI infections have no symptoms. So a lot of the times, this actually goes unrecognized, and in fact, 2/3 of pelvic inflammatory disease, which is caused by STIs, goes unreported. So these women are, walking around suffering, and nobody knows. And pelvic inflammatory disease can lead to infertility as well. So that's a very huge impact on a woman's life. And so we started looking into the reasons for underscreening. This came through a lot of research, a lot of discussion, which I'll go through in a sec. But basically, the big reasons are, lack of awareness is one, but on top of that, they're very practical reasons. So lack of time, work constraints. I don't want to take time off work. I don't have transportation. I feel uncomfortable. This is not something that I typically do in my culture. All of these things sort of added up to people just not going and putting it off. On top of that, for the healthcare system, this becomes very costly because if you're not preventing disease, these women are ending up having to, with invasive cervical cancer, and you have to deal with that, infertility, all of those things. So again, the question is, how can we turn an experience like this, where 1/3 of women are not going, into something a little bit more like this? Maybe not quite this happy, but like a little bit more comfortable of an experience. And so in our project at OCAD, we started doing a lot of research, design research. So this is just a summary of what we did. We did interviews, we shadowed people. I myself had about 4 Pap tests that year in different scenarios to figure out what people were feeling. User observation, and a lot of literature review. We did a lot of literature trying to understand the science behind it. And this is just an example of our experience prototyping going through. So we came up with a lot of ideas on how this could be solved. And through discussion with some experts in the field, we discovered this idea of self-sampling. And self-sampling is the ability of women to collect their own samples to screen for infections using molecular diagnostics. So we were put onto this by a researcher who was actually the wife of one of my professors, Bruce Hines. And she kind of pointed us in the direction and said, look at this. So we did look look at it, and what we found was it was a really good idea. It was very comparable to physician-collected samples, at least for HPV and chlamydia gonorrhea, from what we could tell. It had better sensitivity than physician-collected swabs, in fact, for chlamydia and gonorrhea. The patients were saying that they really liked this methodology. They were more likely to participate if they could collect their own samples. Increased participation, that had been proven already through a couple studies. So generally, the consensus was that this is a good strategy. But as designers, what we started identifying was in each of these research studies, they were asking women to use a device like this. So it's just a standard swab, and it comes with certain challenges when people are doing this on their own. Namely, this product is designed for a healthcare provider with a line of sight to the cervix, which is where they're collecting a sample from. There are some usability issues. So if you ask a woman to insert this 3 inches, turn it 5 times, everybody's going to do it differently. You're going to have no consistency, and that's going to end up with an inefficient program in the end. And also patients, this is not something that patients typically do. They're not comfortable with it, and they may not have the confidence to actually do it, which actually did come out in the research. Women felt like they wanted to do it, but didn't have the confidence. So based on our research, we went out there, we tried to gather information from the women themselves in many different focus groups, try to identify if there was a perfect product, what would this look like to you? And then at the same time, we went out and we talked to doctors and asked them the same thing. Where does the sample need to come from? What do you have to do with it? How does it get transported? How does it get processed? And this is the design criteria that we came up with. So essentially it needs to be simple. We wanted it to be no more than 2 steps, operate the same way, cervix target, one size fits all. Women are different sizes, so that was something to keep in mind. Women want it to be comfortable, they don't want to bend over too much. And so these were the types of things that we wanted to do. This was just a snapshot of our process. So again, lots and lots of ideation, lots and lots of prototyping, and eventually we came out with this product. So this product is called Swab. This is the resulting output of all of our research over, not just from OCAD, but over the life of Eve Medical as well. And how it works is a woman would just insert the white tip, very much like a tampon, turn the handle, that would extend or rotate a swab at the same time, collecting a sample from the cervix area, and that's it. It gets sent off to a lab in a box, and the lab will process it, and then a result will come out. So this is the output of the design that we had. So I'm sitting there as a young designer now at OCAD, at the end of OCAD, and I really had no intention actually of starting a company, but one of my professors, Diane Cruteau, who designed the ACTAR dummy, the CPR dummy, she took me aside and said, this is a really good project, and I think that it could help a lot of people. Why don't you see if you could apply for a grant or something? And she encouraged me to take it a little bit further. But we did have a lot of early challenges that we discovered along the way. Namely, I had no business experience, no health background at all, which seemed to be a little bit of a challenge. But on top of that, we realized that as a medical device, there's a lot of hoops to run through. So medical devices need regulatory approval. Regulatory approval means you need a quality system in place. A quality system in place means that you have to prove your product is safe and effective, which probably means clinical studies. And oh yeah, we need money. So those were all of some of the early challenges that we were thinking about. But at the same time, there were opportunities that we felt we could tap into as well. Namely, there was a big change in policy that we're seeing in healthcare, where HPV was going to become the primary method of people screening for cervical cancer instead of the Pap test. We thought that this was a really good opportunity to jump on that change. At-home healthcare, telemedicine, this was something that was growing and is still growing, and we felt that there were opportunities for that. We really believed that this needed to happen in terms of providing a better experience for women, and of course women wanted it, and so that obviously was an opportunity we saw. So I'm going to walk through very quickly our journey from OCAD all the way through to where we are today. So when I graduated, this was actually the product that we had. It was entirely non-functional. It was a 3D printed prototype that smelled like spray paint at my graduation. Again, no real business experience, manufacturing experience, none of that. The first step we took was applying for a grant from OCE, which we got. It was about $10,000, and we filed some IP for it. So this is the baseline. This is where we started from. From there, what we did was we started applying for more grants. We worked with a mechanical engineer to make her swab into a real functional product. This is where we started learning a little bit more about medical device classifications. That really drove our process for separating the collection from the transportation, and it's a medical device classification thing. Again, we went out there, did focus groups, talked to women, tried to figure out what kind of a device they like to use, lots and lots of prototypes. Material testing was a significant issue we came across. So one of the problems we had at the prototyping phase was the internal component of our swab is flexible. It sits in a curved position. And when we were trying to prototype these things, we couldn't find the right material to mimic what a nylon or that kind of material down the line would look like. And so we actually had no way of testing this product without actually starting to manufacture and put together a prototype tool to do that. So the end result was quite different, as you can see from the original, and that's what we did. So we went down the road of prototype tooling. At this point, we were very, very fortunate to get the Martin Walmsley Fellowship, which is basically a scholarship for entrepreneurs. And so that allowed me to quit my other 2 part-time jobs to come on board and start working on this full-time. Lots of back and forth with the prototype, the toolers. So this is, I mean, anyone who works with hardware, this is something I'm happy to talk about later, but we struggled a little bit with working with the toolers in Canada versus China, like where should we place our tooling? How is that going to impact the business down the line? Filed a new IP, which we had developed based on our iterations, and we went to our first HPV conference, and we found clinical advisors and brought them on board. When I think backwards, this was actually one of the key things that we did, because as an early stage company, especially with no healthcare experience, we weren't necessarily taken very seriously. And we found that in order for us to be established, to be taken seriously as a company, we needed key opinion leaders to vouch for us. So there's a particular advisor, Attila Lorenz. I really wanted him to be on our board of advisors, and I saw him at the conference across this gigantic exhibition hall, and he was alone. He was looking at a poster, and I ran across the hall and darted for him, walked up, and me hopping, trying to play it cool, and be like, "Hi, Dr. Lorenz. Oh, you happen to be here. I was really wanting to talk to you." And I essentially stalked him through the whole conference and asked him for a 5-minute conversation, which turned into a 45-minute conversation. And at the end of that, he said, "Yes, I want to help you. I'm going to join your board, and I will support you." So that was a really huge win for us, just in terms of finding other people to support us. So we started production. We decided to put our manufacturing in China in the end, but all of the assembly was done in Canada. So this is us assembling our kits or our units inside of a fume hood at St. Joseph's Hospital in McMaster, which sort of minimizes the contamination. And so our next big challenge was 2 things. One was we had to conduct a clinical study at McMaster, and we had to put together our quality system, which typically you would usually hire a consultant for tens of thousands of dollars to put it together, but we didn't have the money. And so what we did was we ended up hiring a really, really, really awesome intern, gave her a quality manual, and said, "Here, you have to do this." And to her credit, same as us, she had no background in quality whatsoever. A year later, we were audited, and we passed that audit, and she did it. She was, she was straight out of school, had a couple years, of experience at Princess Margaret, and I think that really speaks to the tenacity of entrepreneurs to learn whatever they need to learn and make it happen. So the McMaster study we partnered up with a couple researchers, but then tragedy struck. So we started our clinical study, and our device fell apart. It didn't work. The components that we had decided to use just were off-the-shelf components. They weren't manufactured by us. We couldn't control them. And so when we got to the clinical study phase, they weren't performing the way we needed to. And so at this moment, we really wondered whether we were going to make it as a company. We really wondered whether this was the end of the line, whether we should stop. But then, thinking about the problem, thinking about what we really wanted to accomplish and make this a better experience for women, we pushed through, convinced investors to fund our next round of product development, and we actually redesigned that brush, and now that's something that we manufacture ourselves. So we moved on. Her Swab is now complete. We started raising our seed round. We got our ISO certification. We put together our CE mark, so we're now approved in Canada. I got to meet Richard Branson and be on a panel with him. This doesn't really have anything to do with the story, but I feel like it is a picture that I wanted to present on a big screen. And then we started getting orders. So we got 3,000 unit order from Slovenia. This is from public health agencies. So these are agencies that are adopting self-sampling as a way to increase their screening rates within their countries. So Slovenia ordered, Italy ordered, and we got some orders from the UK. So that was very, very exciting. We restarted the McMaster study, and it finished well, and we also started another study at McGill. So we closed our seed round finally. That was sort of another huge undertaking that we had to do. We had a challenge, which is that we had all of these orders to fulfill, but our manufacturing it still needed work. We needed to go there and we needed to work with them. But anybody who's done manufacturing in China knows that there is a 2-week period around Chinese New Year where everybody goes on vacation. And so this particular year, Chinese New Year fell early, and so we didn't have a lot of time between January and whenever Chinese New Year was to actually get this product out and delivered. And these were our first orders. We knew that if we didn't deliver, it was going to be at least a couple months before we could do it after Chinese New Year, and we didn't want to lose those orders. So my co-founder, Evan, purchased a one-way ticket to China, and his mission was to get the manufacturing up and running and ship those kits before Chinese New Year. He was there for 5 weeks, and he did it. We shipped it, we delivered it to the customers, and that was a really huge win for the company. Moving on, we got Health Canada approval, and because we delivered our orders, they paid us, and we got our first sales. That was really, really exciting for us. And now we were working not just with Dr. Lorenz, the key opinion leader in HPV, we're working with public health agencies who are testing this in a real-world setting. After that, we finished up the McMaster study, and we had our first publication as well. This was a huge win, especially in the medical device space, because people really need the data to do that. So, we're sort of established as a startup now. We have sales, we have customers, but the feeling of how are we going to make this available to women kept coming back. And yes, we were working with public health agencies. Yes, they were going to deliver it to women who were under-screened, but what about all of the other women? It didn't feel like it was accessible enough. And so we went back to the drawing board and we drew this picture. So there's a patient, there's a physician, and a laboratory. That's what you need in order to get screening done. We had a solution for the patient. They could collect their own samples, but we had no solution for the other two. And so we went back to the drawing board and said, how can we build a system that will enable women to order a kit, get screened whenever they want, regardless of whether or not they're participating in a public health program? And so we went back to the drawing board again, talked to all of these stakeholders. These are the criteria that we ended up with. I'm not going to go through them with you, but essentially these are the things that we talked about. And eventually we came up with evekit.com. And so this was a service product that we built around her swab. It's a home screening service for HPV and STIs, which connects patients with an accredited lab and a physician so that they can screen themselves remotely at home. And this is how it worked. They order it online, get it in the mail, collect a sample, mail that sample to the lab, and check their results online, talk to a doctor. This is the system that we envisioned. And this is how the user flow would work. So you have the user, the system, the lab, the doctor. Each one of them has their own criteria. So that's what we put together. And we started working again. So we ran an Indiegogo campaign last year and tried to sort of assess the feedback on this. We got really great feedback. There was a lot of really great media as well. So we were really feeling like this is something that people would want. We brought a lab partner on board, which was actually not an easy feat. Labs are very difficult to work with. Don't tell our lab partner that, but it's hard. It's hard to get them on board. And then on top of that, we needed to go back to the research table to say, okay, we're not looking at this as a research context anymore. This is in a commercial context. And it was such a sad day when we realized that we had to do 2 more validation studies in order to get this done. But we did it. We put it together. We recruited women on our own. We went into the clinics. We asked them to participate in our study, and we got that done. And of course, the portal development we started working on, and we're continuing the public health work as well in the background. So this is us. Today, we put this all together, and finally we are launching evekit.com next week, and that's the wrap-up of this story, which we're really excited about, and I hope that you guys will check it out. So this is our team. I'm here talking about this, but no startup story, no design story is ever one person. It's always a team of people that pulls all of these things together. And I'm always so surprised again at the hard work that goes in, not just from me, and I have a vested interest in this, but in the people that I work with. The other thing that I kind of want to state is, we talked a lot about design, we talked a lot about how this translated into business and our journey to doing that, but at the end of the day, I think, when I think about what motivates and drives us the most, it's really the women at the center of it. So through our Indiegogo campaign, through us telling this story, there have been many women who've told me about their daughter who died of cervical cancer, their girlfriend, their mother, and these are people who are really impacted by this disease. So at the end of the day, that's what we really want to do. We want to reduce those screening rates, increase those screening rates, and reduce those the disease rate. So that's it. That was the whole story. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Jess. Are there any questions from the audience for Jessica and her journey?
I'm curious about those first orders that came in. How does the marketing side of things work for initial medical devices, like the first orders from Slovenia, I think? How did they find out about your product?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So again, we sort of identified that there were these public health organizations that were very interested in using self-sampling as a way to expand their existing screening programs to women who were not participating. And so our way of marketing was essentially going to conferences and identifying those decision makers within organizations. Usually there's some kind of publication or they've done some background research, so you know who they are. But more importantly, it's building relationships. So the fact that Attila was an advisor to us, but he was also an advisor to Slovenia's screening program, made it a lot easier for us to have opportunities that we may not have otherwise gotten. So it was really, we kind of networked our way into it.